So when you requested this deep dive, into adult autism in prison,
Yeah.
I got to admit, I was pretty blown away by the numbers.
Yeah.
We're talking like up to 15% of prisoners potentially being on the spectrum.
Yeah.
That's 15 times what we see in the general population.
Right.
It's a massive difference. And today we're gonna kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, it is a fascinating area. And it's not because autistic individuals are somehow predisposed to criminal behavior.
Right.
Our sources, especially the blog post from Adult Autism in Prison, a Systemic Failure, really highlight how the criminal justice system itself is often ill-equipped to understand and accommodate the unique needs of this population.
So are we saying essentially that autistic individuals are being unfairly penalized for behaviors that stem from their neurodiversity?
Exactly.
What are some of the specific ways this might play out?
Yeah, one of the biggest issues is communication.
Okay.
Autistic individuals might communicate differently, both verbally and non-verbally. They might not make eye contact. They might stim or have difficulty understanding complex language or abstract concepts. And all of these things can be misconstrued, in a legal context, especially during police interrogations.
I can see how that could be a problem.
Yeah.
The blog posts mentioned sensory overload as a major challenge for autistic individuals.
Yeah.
How might that play out during something like a police encounter?
Yeah, so sensory overload can be a real trigger, leading to meltdowns or shutdowns.
Right.
Imagine being bombarded with bright lights, sirens, rapid fire questions, and pressure to respond quickly in a situation that's already stressful.
Yeah.
This can lead to behaviors that might be misinterpreted as aggression or noncompliance.
Right.
Which, further escalates the situation.
So we're talking about misunderstandings on both sides.
Right.
The individual is struggling to cope and communicate effectively. And law enforcement, without proper training, might misinterpret those behaviors. That sounds like a recipe for things to spiral out of control.
And that can lead to unnecessary arrests, false confessions, and ultimately wrongful convictions.
Oh, wow.
Think about the concept of Miranda rights. The language is complex and the implications are difficult for many neurotypical people to grasp.
Right.
For someone on the spectrum, understanding those rights and their consequences can be even more challenging.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And these challenges don't just disappear when someone enters the prison system, do they?
Absolutely not. In fact, they often get worse.
Okay.
Prison environments are inherently structured with strict routines, limited personal space, and constant noise, which can be incredibly challenging for many autistic individuals.
So you're saying even basic aspects of prison life could be triggers for sensory overload and anxiety.
Exactly. And without adequate accommodations or understanding from prison staff, these challenges can lead to further isolation, mental health issues, and difficulty adjusting to life inside. Imagine trying to navigate complex prison rules, social interactions with other inmates, and the constant threat of violence, all while struggling with sensory overload and social anxiety.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for disaster.
The website Cheap ABA really emphasizes the need for change, specifically mentioning autism-specific training for law enforcement.
Right.
What might that look like in practice?
So such training programs could focus on recognizing the signs of autism, understanding common challenges, and adapting communication styles accordingly.
Okay.
This could involve using clear and concise language, avoiding jargon, and giving individuals time to process information.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And along with training, what other kinds of accommodations or support systems could be implemented?
Yeah.
Throughout the legal process, the blog posts seem to suggest that this is crucial both before and during incarceration.
Accommodations could include things like providing visual aids, to explain legal concepts, or having an advocate present during questioning.
Yeah.
It's also important to recognize that, autistic individuals might stim as a way of self-regulating.
Right.
And these behaviors shouldn't be misinterpreted as signs of guilt or deception.
I'm thinking about the blog post that mentioned how an autistic person's tendency to be overly trusting or compliant with authority figures could make them more susceptible to manipulation during interrogations. It's a chilling thought.
Absolutely. The desire to please authority figures, coupled with difficulties understanding complex social situations, could lead to someone confessing to a crime they didn't commit, simply to appease the officers or escape a stressful environment.
It seems like a lot of this comes down to a lack of understanding on both sides. So what steps can we take to bridge this gap? The Cheap ABA website proposes several solutions,
Yeah.
including alternative sentencing and community-based programs. Could you unpack those ideas a bit further for us?
Sure, instead of defaulting to incarceration, especially for nonviolent offenses, judges could consider alternative sentencing options like probation, community service, or even restorative justice programs.
Interesting.
These alternatives could provide autistic individuals with the support they need
Hmm.
while also addressing the harm caused by their actions.
That's a really interesting concept, and it ties into the idea of community-based programs.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of what these programs might look like
Yeah.
and how they could help?
Of course, community-based programs could include things like social skills training, job training, supported employment, or even therapeutic group homes.
Wow.
The goal is to provide autistic individuals with the skills and support they need to live independently and thrive in their communities.
So we're moving away from a punitive model
Right.
and embracing a more rehabilitative approach that focuses on addressing the root causes of problematic behaviors. It sounds like a much more humane and effective approach, wouldn't you say?
I would absolutely agree. By investing in community-based programs, we can address the underlying needs of autistic individuals,
Mm.
reduce recidivism rates, and create a more inclusive and supportive society.
And this benefits everyone, right? When we invest in the well-being of all members of our society to
Exactly.
create a stronger and more vibrant community as a whole.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that people with autism are valuable members of our society,
Mm.
and they have a right to live fulfilling lives just like everyone else.
Yeah.
By addressing the systemic failures that contribute to their overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, we can create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
It sounds like we're talking about a real paradigm shift here.
Yeah.
It's not just about tweaking existing systems.
Right.
It's about fundamentally changing our approach to justice
Mm.
and how we view neurodiversity.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It requires a shift in perspective
Yeah.
from seeing autism as a deficit to recognizing it as a different way of experiencing the world, a way that can bring unique strengths and perspectives to our communities.
And this shift in perspective has to happen on a societal level, right? It can't just be limited to the legal system.
Absolutely. This brings us to the heart of the issue,
Okay.
which is societal awareness and acceptance. We need to move beyond awareness towards genuine understanding.
Okay, so we've talked about the specific challenges autistic individuals face within the criminal justice system.
Mm-hmm.
But you're suggesting that these challenges are actually symptoms of a much larger societal issue.
Exactly. Think about the way autism is often portrayed in the media.
Right.
It's often depicted as a tragedy, a burden, or even something to be feared.
Yeah.
This creates stigma and misconceptions that can permeate every aspect of an autistic person's life long before any interaction with law enforcement.
So are you saying that we need to challenge those societal perceptions and create a culture that is more accepting and inclusive of neurodiversity? The blog posts seem to point in that direction.
You're exactly right. We need to educate ourselves and others about autism,
Okay.
debunk myths and stereotypes, and celebrate the unique contributions of autistic individuals.
It sounds like a monumental task.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
It starts with small steps. We can challenge casual ableism in our daily lives, support organizations that advocate for autistic individuals, and educate ourselves about the lived experiences of people on the spectrum.
And that education piece is key, right?
Yeah.
We need to move beyond simply knowing that autism exists
Right.
to understanding how it manifests in different ways and appreciating the diverse range of perspectives and experiences within the autistic community.
Absolutely. And that includes understanding that some autistic individuals may not identify with the label autistic or may prefer different terminology.
Right.
It's about respecting individual preferences and recognizing that there is no single right way to be autistic.
It sounds like we're talking about a fundamental shift in how we view difference,
Mm-hmm.
moving away from the idea of a normal and embracing the richness and complexity of human diversity. It feels like we've gradually kind of zoomed out through this whole deep dive, you know, starting with that kind of alarming statistic about autistic individuals in prisons.
Right.
We've moved to, looking at systemic failures in law enforcement and the justice system.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're discussing, broad societal perceptions of neurodiversity.
Yeah.
It really highlights how interconnected these issues are, wouldn't you say?
I couldn't agree more. You can't address one piece of the puzzle without considering the whole picture.
Yeah.
For example, How can we expect law enforcement officers to interact effectively with autistic individuals if the very training they receive is rooted in societal biases and misconceptions about autism?
It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. It's just not going to be stable.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about, creating real change,
Yeah.
we need to address those foundational issues. But that begs the question, where do we even begin to dismantle these deep-seated societal perceptions? It feels almost overwhelming.
It is a daunting task, no doubt. But the sources we've explored offer some hope. Both Cheap ABA and the blog posts we've discussed emphasize the power of education and advocacy.
Okay, let's break that down a bit. What does effective education about autism look like in this context?
Well, it's about going beyond awareness campaigns and simplistic slogans. We need to move towards genuine understanding.
Right.
This means engaging with diverse voices within the autistic community, listening to their experiences, and learning about the wide spectrum of autistic traits. For example, understanding that sensory sensitivities aren't just about disliking loud noises.
Wow.
They can manifest in a myriad of ways, affecting taste, smell, touch, and even internal bodily sensations.
That's a great point. I'm realizing that even my own understanding of autism was quite limited before this deep dive.
Yeah.
And you mentioned advocacy. What are some tangible ways listeners can advocate for autistic individuals both within the justice system and in society as a whole?
There are so many ways to get involved. You can support organizations that are working to reform the criminal justice system,
Okay.
to be more inclusive of neurodiversity. You can write to your elected officials advocating for legislation that supports early intervention programs and community-based services for autistic individuals. You can even start conversations within your own social circles, challenging misconceptions and promoting understanding.
It sounds like the key takeaway here is that change starts with each of us.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more inclusive and just society for autistic individuals.
Exactly. Even small acts of advocacy can have a ripple effect. Imagine if every listener who's engaged with this deep dive took just one action step.
Wow.
Collectively, that could create a powerful wave of change.
This deep dive has really driven home the point that we need to move beyond awareness of autism to action. It's not enough to simply acknowledge that autism exists. We need to actively work to dismantle the systemic barriers and societal biases that prevent autistic individuals from living full and meaningful lives.
I couldn't agree more. And as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. If we can create a world that is truly inclusive and supportive of autistic individuals, imagine the possibilities. Imagine the untapped potential, the creativity, the innovation that we can unlock when we embrace neurodiversity in all its forms.
It's a powerful and hopeful vision.
Yeah.
It's one that I think is worth striving for. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and inspired you to be a force for positive change in your own communities.